"Get your hands off that boy, or I swear I'll cuff you myself." The words didn't come from a cop. They came from a man in cargo shorts, a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, and a plastic badge that said HOA Security Chief. And the person he was shouting at? A licensed paramedic kneeling over a dying teenager mid-CPR. That was the moment everything broke loose. Diego Rivera hadn't planned to be a hero that day. He was visiting his sister, just helping her move some furniture into the new condo she'd bought in the Pine Ridge gated community. It was a quiet place, neatly trimmed hedges, pastel mailboxes, and too many no trespassing signs. As Diego carried a box of plates into the kitchen, a shriek pierced the spring air from the nearby basketball court. Within seconds, he was sprinting toward the sound, his paramedic instincts kicking in before he even consciously registered the situation. A teen boy, maybe 16 or 17, was sprawled out on the court's asphalt, lips turning blue, chest still. A group of kids stood frozen around him, one of them sobbing, "He's not breathing. He's not breathing." Without hesitation, Diego dropped to his knees. "Call 911. He barked to a kid holding a phone. "Tell them it's cardiac arrest. Adolescent male. CPR in progress." He began chest compressions with a steady rhythm drilled into his muscle memory, the kind that doesn't care about HOA rules or property lines. He counted under his breath, sweat already forming on his brow. After 30 compressions, he checked for a pulse. Still nothing. He pulled his bag around, retrieving the portable AED he always kept nearby. He had been off duty, sure, but he was never really off. Just as the AED signaled it was charging, a black SUV with Pine Ridge HOA enforcement stenciled on the side rolled up. Out stepped Rick Masterson, the self-appointed captain of the HOA's volunteer security force. Rick had the look of a man who played too much paintball and treated HOA bylaws like federal mandates. Mirrored sunglasses, a ridiculous tactical vest. He approached like he was raiding a drug cartel. "Step away from the resident," Rick barked. Diego didn't look up. "Medical emergency. I'm licensed. Go wait for EMS." Rick stepped closer, towering over Diego. "You have no right to be here. This is private property. You're not authorized. I'm ordering you to stop." Diego snapped his head up. "I'm saving his life." Rick didn't back down. "You're trespassing. Unauthorized medical practice. You're endangering him." "I'm a paramedic," Diego growled. "I've got ID. I've got gear. What I don't have is time for your HOA nonsense." Rick didn't flinch. Instead, he unhooked a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Last warning." The AED shocked. Diego resumed compressions, heart pounding, as the boy's body jerked slightly, then slumped again. And then it happened. Rick lunged forward, grabbed Diego by the arm, and yanked him back mid-compression. "You're under citizen's arrest," he shouted, forcing Diego onto the ground. The crowd erupted in chaos. One of the teens recording screamed. He was saving him. "What are you doing?" Another kid ran up to Rick, pounding him with his fists. Someone called the police again, but it was too late. The boy on the ground, without those precious compressions, flatlined. No pulse. No breath. The AED blinked uselessly. Diego, still in cuffs, watched as the light went out of that kid's eyes. The cops arrived 6 minutes later. Diego was still cuffed, sitting on the pavement, visibly shaking. The officer who approached took one look at the AED, the trauma kit, and Diego's still open wallet with his EMT license, and just stared. "You arrested a paramedic?" he asked Rick, voice low with disbelief. Rick straightened. "He wasn't authorized to be here. This is private property. There are procedures." He didn't follow them. The officer didn't even respond. He walked over to Diego, helped him up, and removed. "Hello friends, if you're new here, then don't forget to hit subscribe button. And if you like, then hit the like button also, and don't forget to tell me in the comments where you from watching this video." The cuffs. Diego didn't say a word. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just stood there, staring at the body bag now being zipped up by the ambulance crew who had arrived far too late. That kid might have had a chance, until Rick decided to play cop. By evening, the video hit Reddit under the thread titled, "HOA Psycho Arrests Paramedic During CPR, Kid Dies." Within hours, it had 10,000 upvotes. By morning, every major news outlet had picked it up. Hashtags like #CPR arrest and #Diego deserves justice trended globally. People were outraged. Some even called for Rick's arrest. Others demanded Pine Ridge's entire HOA board resign. The most viral clip was of Rick yelling, "He doesn't live here," while Diego shouted back, "He might not live at all." But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Diego didn't want fame. He didn't want a camera in his face. What he wanted, what he needed, was justice. And he knew exactly who to call. His older brother, Elio, was one of the most aggressive civil rights attorneys in the state. The kind of guy who'd sued entire cities and walked away smiling. When Diego told him what happened, Elio was silent for a long time. Then he said, "We're going to bury them." The next morning, Elio held a press conference in front of the hospital where Diego had been treated for minor injuries. Cameras rolled. Microphones crowded his face. "My brother," Emilio said, "was not just assaulted. He was prevented from doing his job. He was stopped from saving a life, and we intend to hold every last person responsible." The crowd of reporters buzzed with questions. Diego stood beside his brother, face solemn but resolute. When asked what he wanted to say to the HOA, he finally spoke. "I hope they enjoyed their power trip," he said, "because the real authorities are coming." And just like that, the tide turned. This wasn't just a case of overreach anymore. This was the moment a private HOA tried to play police and cost a kid his life. And what they didn't know was that the paramedic they cuffed had a legal powerhouse in his corner, and a country full of supporters ready to see justice served. The following morning, Diego sat at the kitchen table in his sister's condo, staring at a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy's face, blue-lipped, gasping, fading, and Rick's smug expression as he slapped those cuffs on. His hands still ached from where the metal had dug into his wrists. His sister moved quietly around the kitchen, trying to give him space, but the silence was thick with unspoken grief. Just as he pushed the coffee aside, his phone buzzed with yet another notification. News articles, interview requests, comment threads. Everyone wanted to hear from the arrested paramedic. But Diego didn't want attention. He wanted accountability. At noon, Elio arrived, all sharp angles and intensity. His suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled, briefcase in hand. He didn't even sit before laying out a plan. "We're suing the HOA for no less than $10 million, he said flatly. Wrongful detainment, obstruction of emergency services, negligent homicide, depending on what the autopsy shows, emotional trauma, you name it. They will pay for this, literally and publicly." Diego didn't respond immediately. He just stared at the floor. Then he nodded once, a tight, almost imperceptible motion. "Good," Emilio said, "because this isn't just about you anymore." Later that day, Diego agreed to give a short press statement outside the hospital. Elio arranged everything. There were cameras, reporters, even a small crowd of supporters with handmade signs that read things like "CPR isn't a crime" and "Justice for Jalen," the name of the boy who had died. When Diego stepped up to the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. He cleared his throat once, then spoke. "I didn't know Jalen," he began, "but I knew he was dying, and I knew I could help. That's what I was trained to do. That's what I've done for 10 years. But instead of being allowed to save him, I was treated like a criminal. I was handcuffed in front of kids, humiliated, and blamed for something I tried to prevent. The person who stopped me wasn't a cop. He was a security officer for a homeowners association." He paused, voice tight. "What happened to Jalen was preventable, and what happened to me was inexcusable." The clip exploded online. People weren't just angry, they were furious. National outrage boiled over. Commentators tore into the Pine Ridge HOA. Cable networks aired interviews with Diego and Elio, while social media flooded with calls for criminal charges. Even emergency services unions across the country began issuing public support. A petition demanding federal oversight of HOA security forces hit 100,000 signatures in 2 days. Meanwhile, inside the HOA's polished, glass-walled office building, panic was setting in. Karen Whitlow, the longtime HOA president, convened an emergency board meeting. The members, mostly retirees and real estate investors, sat stiffly in high-back chairs as she tried to control the narrative. "We are not to blame for what happened," she insisted. "Mr. Masterson acted in accordance with security protocol, and we are not a police force. We are a community organization." But that defense cracked fast. Within hours, a board member known only as Tom H. leaked internal emails to a local news outlet. The emails were damning. One message from Karen to Rick read, No unauthorized personnel during crisis. We must control liability and PR optics. Another, even worse, stated, we don't care if they're licensed. If they don't live here, they don't touch our residents. The backlash was immediate. Commentators dubbed it the privatization of death. The term stuck. Elio wasted no time. He used the leak as Exhibit A in his filing. The lawsuit hit Pine Ridge, HOA like a grenade. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about institutional abuse, racial profiling, and negligence that had resulted in a teenager's death. Elio filed the complaint publicly, ensuring the press would cover every word. The HOA's PR team scrambled, releasing a half-hearted statement that claimed the emails were taken out of context. It backfired. People weren't buying it. Meanwhile, Diego tried to reach out to Jalen's parents. It took a few days, but eventually, they agreed to meet. They sat together in a quiet corner of the hospital chapel. Jalen's mother, Patrice, held her son's basketball jersey in her lap, fingers running over the faded letters. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just asked one question. Do you think he could have made it? Diego didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, he said softly. I really do. She nodded. Her husband, a quiet man with tired eyes, simply said, then don't let them bury this. Elio filed an amended lawsuit that afternoon to include the HOA president and Rick Masterson as named defendants. The damages increased. Reporters camped outside HOA headquarters. A group of protesters blocked the entrance with CPR dummies painted red. One sign read, he had a heartbeat until you stopped it. The pressure mounted. HOA residents began organizing their own meetings. Some were furious about the media storm, claiming it hurt property values. Others were demanding Karen resign and that Rick be terminated immediately. But Rick, he doubled down. He showed up on a fringe podcast in full foam military uniform, declaring, I did what I had to do. That man was a stranger. He didn't belong. The interview went viral for all the wrong reasons. One clip showed him saying, real paramedics follow rules. A split screen showing Jalen's memorial made it onto national television. Rick became a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked authority in suburban America. By the end of the week, federal eyes were on the HOA. A representative from the Department of Justice confirmed they were opening an investigation into the incident and the HOA's internal policies. A local councilman introduced a proposal to ban private organizations from impersonating official first responders. People began calling it Jalen's Law. The HOA's insurance provider began re-evaluating their liability coverage, and rumors swirled that the board was in disarray. But Diego didn't care about the chaos. He sat in his small apartment at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking of what more he could have done. Elio kept him updated on every legal step, but Diego still carried the weight. One life lost. A good kid with a bright future. And all because someone thought authority mattered more than breath. Still, he wasn't broken. He was just getting started. Because Diego knew this wasn't just about Jalen or himself. It was about every first responder who might one day hesitate because of rules made by people who'd never held a dying person in their arms. This fight wasn't over. Not even close. A week after the lawsuit was filed, the story had evolved beyond one tragic event into something much larger. A national conversation about unchecked HOA power, private security acting as law enforcement, and what happens when egos override emergencies. Diego watched it unfold from his couch, flipping between news networks, each one adding new layers of outrage. His name had become a symbol, but he hadn't asked for any of it. What mattered to him wasn't the attention. It was making sure something like this never happened again. On social media, clips from the incident continued to circulate. One particularly viral remix featured Rick's ridiculous quote, "You don't belong here," auto-tuned over footage of Diego being cuffed mid-CPR. It was shared by celebrities, medics, and even politicians. A GoFundMe created to support Diego's legal battle surpassed its goal within hours. Meanwhile, protests outside Pine Ridge's gated entrance swelled to dozens, then hundreds. EMTs showed up in uniform, some holding CPR mannequins with signs saying, "Let us work." Kids wore t-shirts that read, "He could have lived." Inside Pine Ridge, the once pristine community was in meltdown. Property values were dropping, insurance companies were threatening to walk, and the residents had started fighting among themselves. Some blamed Karen and the board for their smug, detached response to the crisis. Others defended them, saying Rick had only tried to protect the neighborhood. But the voices demanding accountability were growing louder. An anonymous letter was circulated among residents calling for a vote of no confidence in the HOA board. It listed over a dozen failures, including misuse of security powers, lack of training, and creating hostile conditions for emergency responders. The final sentence read, "Jalen is dead because of HOA policy. That's not security, that's negligence." Meanwhile, Elio was gathering more ammunition. A whistleblower named Lena, a former Pine Ridge security volunteer, came forward with evidence that shook even seasoned reporters. In a sworn statement, she revealed that Rick had created his own neighborhood patrol manual, filled with language copied from military field guides. He'd even held unauthorized training sessions where volunteers practiced detaining potential threats using zip ties and hand signals. "He treated it like a militia," she said. "He made us believe we were the law inside those gates." Elio filed the testimony with the court, attaching it as a supplement to the growing lawsuit. Things escalated when Lena also provided access to a private HOA message board. In the archived discussions, multiple board members, including Karen, had debated limiting non-resident interventions during medical situations, citing liability risks. One post from Rick read, "Even if they're trying to help, if they're not in the system, they're a threat." The messages were cold, clinical, and chilling. None of them mentioned compassion. None of them mentioned saving lives. It was all about control. When the screenshots leaked to the press, public fury reached a boiling point. Local leaders demanded a criminal investigation. The city council scheduled an emergency hearing. Reporters camped outside Karen's house. Rick hadn't been seen in days, but that changed when he made a dramatic reappearance on a fringe news podcast. Wearing his usual tactical vest and sunglasses indoors, he declared, "I did my duty. That guy was a trespasser. I'm the reason this community is safe." The host nodded, but even his audience seemed unsure. One clip showed Rick calling himself the last line of defense. The comments tore him apart. Diego watched the interview in stunned silence, then turned the TV off and sat in the dark for a long time. He couldn't understand how someone could twist reality so far that they believed they were the hero in the face of death. Rick hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a choice, a conscious, arrogant, fatal choice. Back at Pine Ridge, residents were demanding answers. An emergency town hall was called, and for the first time since the incident, Karen appeared in public. Dressed in a stiff suit, flanked by lawyers, she stood on stage in the community center while dozens of furious homeowners shouted over her attempts to speak. One man yelled, "I bought a house, not a dictatorship." Another woman sobbed as she held up a photo of Jalen. "That was my son's friend," she said. "He could have been mine." The board tried to maintain order, but it was no use. The community was done with silence. A vote was demanded. A recall petition was signed that night by over half the residents. As all of this unfolded, Elio received an unexpected call from a U.S. senator's office. They wanted to discuss Diego's story and explore legislative reform to protect emergency responders from interference. A congressional hearing was being planned. Elio could hardly believe it. What had started as a local tragedy was becoming a matter of national policy. He called Diego immediately. "They want you to testify," he said. "They want to hear from the guy who never stopped trying to do the right thing." Diego was quiet. "I'm not a politician." "You're a paramedic who got arrested for trying to save a life?" Elio replied. "They don't need a politician. They need the truth." Diego agreed. Back in Pine Ridge, tensions hit a breaking point. Someone spray-painted, "You let him die," across the HOA office's front doors. Rick's car was egged. Karen stopped appearing in public. The community pool was padlocked due to safety concerns, and half the neighborhood's residents were now openly discussing leaving. Real estate agents whispered about buyers backing out of deals. The entire neighborhood had become toxic. One of the final cracks came when a second paramedic, a woman named Denise, stepped forward to say she too had been stopped by HOA security months earlier when trying to reach a heat-stroke victim at the community's lakefront. She was delayed by nearly 6 minutes because she hadn't scanned her ID at the gate, and a security volunteer insisted she wait for verification. That case hadn't gone viral. It had quietly faded. But now, everything came roaring back. Denise's story confirmed the problem wasn't Rick, it was the entire system. Diego sat outside one night, watching the sunset from his sister's back porch, when a young boy walked up from the sidewalk, holding something in his hand. It was a candle. "This is for Jalen," he said. "I didn't know him much, but my mom said you tried really hard and I think that matters." Diego took the candle and lit it. The flame flickered in the breeze, warm and stubborn, just like the fight ahead. Because this wasn't over. The system had cracked, but he and Elio were about to break it wide open. The courtroom was packed, not just with legal teams and journalists, but with first responders from across the state. EMTs, firefighters, nurses, even a few doctors in their scrubs, standing shoulder to shoulder in quiet solidarity. It wasn't just about Diego anymore. It was about the principle that no one wearing a fake badge and carrying a clipboard should have the power to stop someone from saving a life. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters live-tweeted every moment. But inside, it was silent enough to hear the shuffle of shoes as the judge entered. The judge was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who had clearly seen more courtroom drama than a television writer could invent. But even she looked uncomfortable as she skimmed the documents in front of her. The list of charges and grievances against the Pine Ridge HOA was staggering. Elio sat, with Diego at the plaintiff's table, calm and prepared. Across from them sat Karen, HOA lawyers, and an empty chair where Rick Masterson's son was supposed to be. Word was he'd gone underground, refusing subpoenas and appearing on niche podcasts claiming the legal system was rigged. The first hours of the proceedings were procedural. Elio laid out the case. Diego, a certified and licensed paramedic, acted within his legal duty to save a life. He was unlawfully detained by untrained security personnel operating under the directives of the HOA. The result was the death of a minor. The court filings included timelines, training records, and video footage. Every detail was airtight. Elio had built the case like an architect designing a fortress, solid, unshakable, and strategically brilliant. Then came the depositions. Karen was first. She tried to maintain composure, answering questions with rehearsed precision. But it didn't take long for Elio to find the crack. When asked if she understood the importance of uninterrupted chest compressions during CPR, she hesitated before saying, "I'm not a medical expert." Elio nodded and calmly played the video. Diego desperately performing CPR, Rick pulling him off, and the defibrillator's cold flatline tone cutting through the noise. The courtroom watched in breathless silence. When it ended, Karen looked visibly shaken. Elio leaned forward. "So you, not being a medical expert, still chose to implement a policy that gave your security team the authority to stop someone from saving a child's life?" Karen fumbled. It wasn't about stopping him. It was about verifying. "Do you believe that child would have wanted you to verify credentials while his heart stopped beating?" She didn't answer. It only got worse. Next, Elio called Lena, the whistleblower, who walked the court through Rick's self-made training manuals and paranoid philosophy of HOA supremacy. She recounted Rick's obsession with neutralizing outsiders and described how he'd once told volunteers that a real emergency was the perfect chance to test their control. Her testimony hit hard. The jury watched every word, some of them visibly disturbed. Then came the surprise witness, a retired police captain who had worked a case involving HOA security interference years earlier. That incident had been quietly resolved, but his insight now painted a grim picture of a pattern. He explained how some HOAs used legal gray areas to justify gatekeeping, even in life-or-death situations. He looked directly at the jury when he said, "Private security playing cop without any training is a danger to every person who ever dials 911. The turning point came when Elio revealed Exhibit C, a series of emails never seen by the public. They were retrieved through legal discovery and included a message from Karen to Rick just 1 week before Jalen's death. It read, "We can't have outsiders running around pretending to be heroes. They just make us look like amateurs." The implication was undeniable. They didn't want help. They wanted control. Elio let the email hang in the air before slowly placing the printed copy on the evidence table. Karen's legal team scrambled, objecting, deflecting, trying to reframe everything as a misunderstanding. But the jury had heard enough. The emotional damage had been done. The courtroom was heavy with it. Still, Elio wasn't done. He called Denise, the second paramedic who had been delayed months earlier while trying to reach a heatstroke victim at the lake. Her story mirrored Diego's. She had credentials. She had equipment. But she wasn't in the system. The delay almost cost a life. This wasn't an isolated event. This was a broken protocol with fatal consequences. The court reporters couldn't type fast enough. As the days passed, it became clear the defense had no path out. Every excuse sounded weaker. Every justification was shredded by facts, by footage, by truth. At one point, a juror openly shook her head during a cross-examination, and the judge had to call for a recess. Behind the scenes, the HOA's legal team attempted to negotiate a settlement. Elio was offered $1.2 million for Diego and a public apology. He declined on the spot. He handed them the discovery folder with a smirk. That offer was insulting, he said. This lawsuit isn't just about money. It's about accountability. Karen, now looking exhausted and cornered, requested a private meeting. She tried to appeal to Diego directly. You have to understand, we were trying to protect the community. That's all. Diego stared at her for a long time. That boy was the community, and you let him die because he didn't fit your checklist. When the jury returned from deliberation, the courtroom was still. The verdict, guilty on all civil counts. The HOA was ordered to pay $10 million in damages to Diego, plus an additional $2 million in punitive damages for willful negligence and emotional distress. Karen closed her eyes when the judgment was read. A gasp rippled through the room. Reporters rushed to the courthouse steps. Within minutes, the news had gone national again. The judge added a final order. Pine Ridge HOA was to dissolve its security program immediately and was barred from ever employing armed or pseudo-enforcement personnel without formal state-approved training and oversight. Rick, though absent, was now facing charges of impersonating law enforcement, obstruction of emergency response, and reckless endangerment. Outside, Diego and Elio stood beneath the courthouse columns, surrounded by microphones. Reporters begged for a statement. Diego finally stepped forward, his voice steady but emotional. This wasn't justice. It was accountability. Jalen should still be here, and I should have never been arrested for doing what I was trained to do. No one should have to choose between saving a life and following a gate code. Behind them, a small group of medics stood holding a banner that read, "Let us save lives." It fluttered in the wind as the press conference ended. The message was clear. The fight wasn't just won. It had reshaped the battlefield, and now there was no going back. The days following the verdict moved like a whirlwind. Pine Ridge was no longer the glossy suburban haven it once branded itself to be. It had become a symbol not of comfort or safety, but of the dangers of misplaced authority. The $10 million lawsuit sent shockwaves across homeowners associations across the country, sparking emergency meetings, retraining protocols, and widespread panic among HOAs that had long operated without oversight. The additional $2 million in punitive damages felt like a national alarm bell, warning every gated community that real consequences now existed for playing law enforcement without the training or accountability. Karen Whitlow resigned before the week was over. Her letter was emailed out at 3 o'clock in the morning, short and bitter. It blamed media distortion, public hysteria, and opportunistic outsiders. But no one was moved. Residents cheered when it was announced she had left town. Her house, once a centerpiece of the community, went up for sale almost immediately. Graffiti appeared on her sidewalk within hours. For simple words painted in red, "You let him die." Rick Masterson's son, after days of silence, was arrested on a rural property 2 counties away, hiding out with a radio scanner and a makeshift bunker of camping gear and canned food. His arrest wasn't dramatic, just a pair of U.S. Marshals walking him calmly to a cruiser, but the footage went viral anyway. His face, blank and defiant, was shown on every channel under every headline. No apologies, no remorse. But now, finally, no power. The residents of Pine Ridge held a vote to completely dissolve the current HOA board. In a near-unanimous decision, they appointed a temporary community council composed of teachers, veterans, and even a retired paramedic. Their first order of business was eliminating the security patrol program and issuing a community-wide apology. A memorial plaque for Jalen was placed at the basketball court where he collapsed. It read, "This court lost more than a game. It lost a future." Flowers and candles appeared beneath it every day. Strangers came just to sit by it. Some cried, others just sat in silence. Diego didn't take a vacation, though everyone told him to. Instead, he went back to work. His EMT supervisor welcomed him back with open arms. offering light duty until he was ready. But Diego insisted on returning to the field. He said he needed to do it, not to prove anything, just to remember what it felt like to save someone. The first call was for an elderly woman who'd fainted in a grocery store. He stabilized her, cracked a smile when she flirted with him on the way to the hospital, and felt something lift from his chest for the first time in weeks. But Diego's role had expanded. He wasn't just a paramedic anymore. He'd become the face of a movement. When the Congressional Committee invited him to speak in D.C., he didn't hesitate. Elio helped him prepare his statement, but Diego didn't need a script. When he stepped up to the microphone, his words came from a place deeper than notes. "I'm not here as a victim," he said. "I'm here as a warning. Because I had the training, I had the tools, I had the knowledge. And still, I was stopped by someone with no medical experience, no legal authority, but with a title and a badge made out of ego. This isn't about one neighborhood. This is about who we allow to have power and what happens when they use it to get in the way of people trying to do the right thing." The committee room fell silent when he finished. A few lawmakers wiped their eyes. A bipartisan round of applause followed. Within a month, legislation was introduced, an emergency responder protection bill, informally named Diego's Law. It made it a federal offense to interfere with licensed medical personnel during active emergency treatment. It also set strict requirements for private security groups operating within HOAs, mandating transparency, reporting, and oversight by local law enforcement. It was just the beginning, but it was real change. Jalen's parents reached out not long after the bill was proposed. They asked Diego if he'd attend a small event they were organizing, a candlelight vigil at the court on what would have been Jalen's birthday. Diego arrived quietly, slipping in among the crowd of friends, classmates, and neighbors. No press, no cameras, just people. Patrice, Jalen's mother, took the microphone and thanked everyone for their love and strength. Then she called Diego forward. He didn't expect to speak, but she held his hand and said, "You didn't fail our son. You honored him." Diego stepped forward, voice soft but unwavering. "I couldn't save Jalen, but I can try to make sure no one ever stops someone like me again. I owe him that much." After the vigil, as the candles flickered and rose along the court's edge, a young girl walked up and handed Diego a folded paper. Inside was a drawing, stick figures, a red heart, and a caption that read, "Thank you for being brave." It sat on his fridge from that day forward. With the settlement funds, Diego didn't buy a new house or car. He used a portion to create the Jalen Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to CPR training, emergency access education, and legal advocacy for responders. The goal was simple: to make sure no responder ever had to explain why they were detained instead of helping. Elio joined as legal advisor. Together, they held workshops across the country, training residents and HOAs alike, not in how to protect property, but in how to protect life. A year later, Diego stood outside a school auditorium before giving a guest lecture on emergency response. A group of teenagers gathered around him. One of them, wearing a hoodie that read "CPR Saves Lives," asked, "Hey, are you the guy who got arrested for helping someone?" Diego smiled. "Yeah, that's me." The kid grinned. "That's awesome." Diego laughed. Not because it was awesome, not because any of it had been easy, but because even now, through all the pain, the chaos, and the lawsuits, something had survived. Something strong, something good. And for the first time since Jalen's heart had stopped beating, Diego felt like the world had finally taken its next breath.